And we are back. You are chatting with John P. Today, we are going to talk about where those discount unworn watches on the internet come from, as well as how the watch industry really works. But first, I'd like to urge you and thank you in advance for liking and subscribing. Once again, if you're familiar with the channel, you've been here before, I do ask you to do this for me, please, because I do keep making videos for you. And also, if you're new to this channel, we talk about watches and vintage watches from an industry professional with a business background. So, Instagram, The Real John P. That's where you can see things about my life, some cool watches that we have at Delray Watch, and also things with a little bit less of a filter so you can catch a little bit of a glimpse into the life of what Federico and I both do here at DelrayWatch.com. And by the way, we've got some interesting Japanese market only Omega watches that should be live at the time of this posting at DelrayWatch.com, so check that out as well. You do not see these every day, definitely not. So let's talk about these discount watches that are on the internet. Now, these are luxury watches, and frequently we'll get phone calls at Delray Watch by someone that says like, hey, I saw this Omega brand new on this, insert random closeouter or green market dealer's name on the internet. Like, why are they so much less than a pre-owned watch? Sometimes, very rarely, because we try to be competitive, but sometimes it happens, right? And we're gonna go through a list, kind of where the watches flow in the industry, the luxury watch industry. There's some brands that don't follow these rules or kind of these trends that I'm about to talk about, but this is incredibly insightful for a collector or a shopper to know what's going on with these watches, because in my earliest days of collecting 10, 11 years ago, I was also very confused about this. So now being a part of the industry, being partnered with Federico and Delray Watch, and knowing a lot of how the industry works, almost all of it at this point, there are some things that are going on that should really be talked about just as a matter of fact. I'm not saying these are good or bad things. So let's start with kind of the brands, right? There's so many watch brands out there: Breitling, Rolex, Omega, Patek, Hublot, you name it. And here's the thing: very few brands actually make all of their parts. There's movement manufacturers, there's case manufacturers. There's a company called Straumann. They make hairsprings. They're owned by the same company that owns Moser. There's Precision Engineering. They make a lot of parts for the industry. There's parts manufacturers in other countries, China, different parts of Asia, and let's be very clear about this. The facts are the brands do purchase parts from all over the world and put them together in Switzerland, modify them, polish them. There is a lot of value, and we're talking about a wide array and different varying degrees of quality of brands. And so the first thing we have to start with is the brands. They don't always make all of their parts. I won't get into the specific brands. So moving on, you have the brands, right? The brands, they construct these watches of parts they either create or get elsewhere from around the world. They usually do this in Switzerland, but there's also German watch manufacturers, there's Japanese watch manufacturers, and there's other manufacturers across the world, including the United States, for matter of fact. So the brands, they make the watches. They assemble them. They're like an auto manufacturer. They put pieces together, and they do a great job, usually. And from there, the brands have two primary ways that they typically sell their watches. Now, traditionally, you'd have authorized dealers. An authorized dealer is a company that is not part of the brand. So, for example, Rolex authorized dealer is just that. An example might be Scheibens, it might be Mayors, it might be Tourneau. It could be a large brand, a small brand, or a company rather, and they are authorized to carry Rolex watches. And Rolex will say, hey, it's time to place your order. We'll give you a few subs and some date just the exact watches they get. That's once again, that's another conversation, and that gets a little bit deeper in terms of Rolex. So basically, this company can sell Rolex watches, and they are allowed to, and they purchase them directly from Rolex with resale, and they can write the names of the customers on the card, and they go about their merry way. Now, the brands, they also can have boutiques. Now, a brand owns the boutiques, or the companies or the holding companies, which I mentioned in another video, they own the boutiques. So for example, here in Miami, there's a place called the Design District, and there are many boutiques there, right? There's a Grand Seiko boutique, there's a Panerai boutique, there's many other boutiques, and they're owned by the brands. So the brands will ship their watches to these boutiques, and they'll also hold events and things like that. And the boutiques, their employees are all employees of the brands and the holding companies. So when you go to the boutiques, you get a very uniform experience for that brand or companies or collections of brands. So if you go to a Patek boutique, you should expect the same level of service and the same overall environment and the way that you're treated almost anywhere in the world. Sure, you're going to see a little bit different, some things that are different depending on where you are in the local culture, but generally speaking, when you go to a boutique, you will have a uniform, very high-end experience. Now, with that experience comes pretty much the lack of ability to negotiate. The brands are pretty tight when it comes to their boutiques, and they don't want to feel like they're giving you something, whether it's a discount or something for free. It's more about the experience, the whole luxury and the glamour and just feeling good about it. It's a luxury experience. We're talking about luxury, expensive items here. So when you walk into an Omega boutique or Rolex boutique, do not expect a discount. If they give you a discount, it's very rare. The boutiques are about protecting the brand. Now, the authorized dealers, they can generally give you a discount. On Rolex, they're probably not. They have no reason to on popular brands like that. Though if you walk into like a Breitling authorized dealer, they're probably going to give you a discount if you ask for one. Maybe, just depending on how they're feeling that day and, your level of, how well you're known with that authorized dealer. And just like if you were to walk into a Breitling boutique, they're not going to give you a discount. Even though Breitling is not selling as many watches as they once were, the boutiques are there to preserve and convey an image of luxury, and it really does work for them. And now we're going to get into the area about where are these unworn or new, sometimes people call them, even though technically the proper term is unworn, watches. Where are they coming from? So on shops like a Joma Shop or an Ashford, I'm not condoning them, by the way. The gray market is not something I touch. But basically, these companies are buying these watches from one of two places. These gray market dealers are buying the watches directly from the brands. So even Omega or Breitling, they'll say, hey guys, we produced too many watches this month. Let's dump some off to these guys. We'll take the warranty card out of the box. So for all intents and purposes, this watch could have come from anywhere, even though it came from Omega or Breitling. And so there will be no factory warranty. If there is any warranty, it'll be left up to the gray market seller to provide that warranty to the customer, and we're going to sell these at steep discounts, much larger discounts than they would sell the watches to any authorized dealer, and of course they own the boutique. So when a gray market gets a watch, they're getting it from one, either directly from the brand, or they're also buying them in lots from jewelry stores or authorized dealers that need to dump inventory or they've went out of business. So, it's very common practice in parts of Asia. If the numbers are low, they pretty much just take the warranty card out or sometimes even leave them in, and they just sell lots of watches at either break even or a few percentage points above that to gray market dealers, and the gray market dealers will spend hundreds of thousands, and it works for everyone. And the brands generally don't care. Some of the more prestigious, tighter brands, they would care a lot, like Rolex cares, Patek cares. The brands that are so heavily focused on only their image and retaining the value, those brands do care when that happens, and there can be penalties for dealers. Though like brands like Graham or Girard Perregaux or Ulysse Nard and similar brands like that, or even sometimes Omega, for what it's worth, they generally don't care as long as their sales are up. So, if a jewelry store in Asia is buying tons of watches and they just didn't perform whatever, the markets in that country or nation were just not doing too well that month, they'll dump some inventory to one of these gray dealers, and they can still keep placing their order next month, because also the brands hold authorized dealers to certain quotas. So the brands are almost perpetuating this whole ecosystem of finding the best price, finding the best unworn price at this gray market dealer. This one's $20 less than this one. And some of the brands, they do perpetuate this, but at the end of the day, they're owned by publicly traded companies, and unfortunately they have to meet the demands of their investors. So it could be this. The same could be said about most businesses in the world, whether it's oil or cars. If it's publicly traded, they have to make better returns for the investors, or there will be, serious business concerns. So that's kind of where these watches are coming from. Now, moving into a different section of where these watches could be ending up is you have pre-owned dealers like DelReyWatch.com. You have forum flippers, so guys on the forums that kind of just trade here and there. And you also have private parties. Now, in these three different groups of dealers or traders, there are some major distinctions which I need to make aware. So, pre-owned dealers. If you're a pre-owned dealer, you generally have a watchmaker, you have staff, you have insurance, you have all the necessary things that a business would have in any other industry to make you professional. You have a website, you have a phone number, all of that you typically have. Now, you may get some unworn watches, but generally speaking, you trade pre-owned watches. Then you have the forum flippers. Now, sometimes these guys claim that they're dealers, and sometimes they may be dealers. For example, we at Del Rey Watch, we do sell on the forums. Now, I'll say mostly the forums are not a big avenue for us. I'll admit that, though it's great to engage with you guys even here, both on YouTube as well as the forums. So the forums are just kind of a crucial part of the industry that's always kind of been there. So that's why we're there. And they're going back into the types of guys on the forums, you have the private parties and you have the flippers. Now, when you're not working with a business on the forums, you need to be very cautious in determining, the kind of feedback that they've received, because let's face it, in this industry, if you can see where these watches are flowing, there's a lot of gray area. Now, you just need to make sure, by the way, and this is not a video about determining where to buy a watch, but you need to make sure that the guys on the forums, the flippers, they actually did service their watch if they told you so. So if they say recently serviced, ask them. That's always the number one. People say, my watch was recently serviced, and then, we take it in, and it has an amplitude of 120. So you do need to make sure that the watch was actually serviced and find out who had actually performed the service. Because that's the number one on the forums, especially when it's not all quite there. And you have private parties, people like you or I, me previously to Del Rey Watch, just trading watches with one another, similar to like a Craigslist or an eBay, sure. There are some considerations with those, but there's a private party. And when we're talking about a discount new watch, the watch could have ended up in any of these people's hands. Sometimes, people on the forums, the flippers, they come to us and they have a watch that's unworn, and they bought it the same way. They walked into their local jewelry store, and the jewelry store pulled out the card and said, hey, I will give you this at a little bit above cost because just because I like you. But actually, they did have to clear up some funds, or perhaps they got it from a gray market seller. And so if you follow the life cycle of the watches, there's many different places where you can purchase the watch, but depending on the type of experience that you want, there's varying degrees of pricing as well as warranty. The warranty card in all of the stages here in the life cycle of these watches really is the bargaining chip, because without the warranty card, there would be no great reason to go to an authorized dealer, because you could get the watches gray market as well. And so when we think about that, personally, I find that incredibly interesting. And I know that when I was an earlier collector, 10 or 11 years ago, it was always very confusing. And we get a lot of calls at Del Rey Watch, and, we explain it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this here with you guys, and leave in the comments below if you found this incredibly insightful, or perhaps did you already know about this? Actually, leave in the comments below. Did many of you know about kind of how these watches travel? Leave below. I want to hear about it. Also, where do you buy your watches? Is it private party? Is it the forums? Do you only go to boutiques, or do you only go with authorized dealers? One last thing, I have to mention this actually, because in 2019, the brands are getting very tight about where they send their most coveted watches and their most desirable watches, like the Patek Nautilus, even the Aquanaut now, some of the Royal Oaks. Basically, if you want to get some of these pieces, you need to make really good friends with the boutiques. You need to spend with them, and you need to be in their system. The brand boutiques are getting so good with knowing their customers. They're really, really rewarding them. So if you want to get a new watch like that and you don't want to pay over sticker, that's what you need to do. So leave in the comments below if you've done this or you're thinking about this. Also, check out DelRWatch.com, Instagram, The Real John P. Hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. A quick one for you here. Let's have a great week. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.